Hello and good morning to the Maloney class as well as the Pines class. I hope everybody has been well. The rain has certainly been a welcome sign for something positive here. A nice long rain on Thursday. Our lesson topic today is Isaiah. What a mountain to climb. I think about the encounter that the Apostle Philip had with the Ethiopian official. I think he was some sort of official, but he's on the road, by the road in his chariot or whatever vehicle he had, and he's reading a scroll. This is all recorded by Luke in Acts somewhere. And Philip sees him and walks over and asks him, he says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And his reply is, I think, appropriate for the lesson for me today. He says, "How can I understand? I need someone to guide me." Well, I feel that way, and so I thought about something that I have considered for a while now about actually the whole Old Testament, which I hope will be a guide to sort of string together any ideas that are worth anything, and a beacon so we can hang things on this thing, which is how in the world have the Jewish people stayed together, stayed cohesive all these years. You recall the history, the Hebrew people came to Samuel and said, we want a nation, we want a leader, we want a king. And that began the kingdoms of the Hebrew people. Saul was the first, and then David, which was probably the apex. But it didn't take long when we're measuring over 25, 26 or longer centuries ago from right now, didn't take long for that to fail. So that didn't survive. The kingdom split, and there were now two kingdoms, the northern and the southern kingdom. Well, again, it didn't take very long for the northern kingdom to be overrun by a foreign power, and they were taken into exile. And they lost the cohesion. At least that was the view from the southern kingdomers. They disliked the Samaritans. That was the name that I associate with the northern kingdom. And then, of course, it didn't take long for the Babylonians after that event to be overrun the southern kingdom, and they go into exile. They were not absorbed into the culture, completely into the culture of the Babylonians, and the when King Cyrus, the builder of the Persian Empire, overran the Babylonians, he freed the Hebrews who were there in Babylonia to go home. Well, they were back. Well, back is not quite the right word. They're scattered all over the place. So the question arises now that our so-called guide, what is it? What's the essence of the thing that survived all of that? And shoot, it survived even after that, all the way 25 centuries or so. all the way up to 1948. That's the next kingdom, I guess, that the Hebrews had. What is the essence of the thing that did not die? What kept the cohesion? This thing that, against all odds, the persecution, I think of the Holocaust, all of these things, and yet they stayed cohesive. What is it? And the best thing I could think of is the covenant. The covenant between God's people and God himself. That I place my finger on is where we ought to look to help guide us through this lesson. Now, as soon as I say that, and the covenant is a curious one. It's several people, the whole host of the Hebrews, and one agent, namely God. I have a question about that. An analogy. It may not be a strong one, but anyhow, it serves as analogy in my thinking. I think about a summer camp. I went several times to a summer camp for boys. And the one I have in mind met in the mountains of North Carolina. Now, it often happens that excursions from the campus of the southern camp, of the summer camp, occurs, and groups of boys go out and spend maybe 3 nights out away from the campus, away from flush toilets and away from the dining hall. In this instance, there was one counselor, senior counselor, and one junior counselor, then a bunch of boys. Well, we were sat down and we made a covenant of sorts. You're not going unless you can agree to abide by the following rules. And they had to do with the fact, the rules, that is, that we were away from somebody who's going to prepare a meal and clean up, and away from a nice bathroom facility. 2 nights, 3 days. Well, so we all agreed, and off we went. And after a day, or maybe on the second day, after a full day of kayaking or whatever else was the activity of the day, and we were pretty hungry, it's getting dark, the head counselor brought us all together, and he says, all right, boys, somebody has made an egregious, he didn't say that this way, but made a big violation of the rules we agreed to. You were allowed on this trip because you agreed to these things. And there was some problem with the latrine that we carefully prepared. Now, he says, nobody is going to have supper until the perpetrator confesses. So everybody to his own tent. And I thought, here I am. I'm being punished for something I didn't do. I didn't even know it was done. Well, that's the aspect I refer to, that of this covenant. Again, it makes it marvelous that I don't see a lot of comment or any comment by Isaiah or anybody else about that. And the editors of our quarterly obviously didn't see anything, that there's no mention of it, that here we are in a whole session of the spring quarter. The topic is justice, not legal justice, but the justice of God. And it's this very thing, this covenant relationship with God, that does seem to have a piece in it that I'd like to have some explanation for. Okay, well, for the lesson, when was it written and by whom? That is Isaiah, prophet Isaiah. Well, by whom, I was somewhat surprised to read that, well, we all are probably familiar with the fact that there are two Isaiahs, Isaiah 1 and 2. Our lesson comes from 2nd Isaiah. The book, chapters 1 through 39, is generally considered written by a school of prophets. By school, I mean they seem to agree on what God is thinking, because they were the instruments to bring the message to the people, to the folks on the other end of the agreement of it that we're looking at. Well, let's see, I lost my train of thought. Okay, first, this is a school that was brought together. I didn't say that right. The prophets accounted not for one first Isaiah, but for several first Isaiahs that all seem to be agreeable. And their messages were consistent enough, so might as well call it one person. And the mechanism here is interesting too. The prophets didn't write anything down, the scribes did. So we've got another whole layer of interpretation here. The prophet interprets, thinks about what God should be, what God is saying, and passes that on, what God is planning, and God's notion about the covenant, whether his people are living up to their part of the deal. And in the first Isaiah seemed to think that we weren't living up to our deal, and destruction was down the road. Well, of course it was. The Babylonians did come in and wiped them out. Second Isaiah, though, and we're going to read the lesson here in a few minutes, is different. Again, scholars think that it was a school or a like-minded prophets for second Isaiah whose ideas were close enough together so they were considered as one, and they were written down probably at the time of King Cyrus of Persia, when he was in the process of conquering everybody, including the Babylonians, and forming the great Persian Empire. And God's word to them seemed to shift because of the fact that they had maintained some cohesion even in exile. And so God, in our lesson, we'll hear it, I hope you can hear it, is looking for a better day, away from persecution. Almost to say, you're doing well, you've learned your lesson, you stuck to your guns, you've stayed with the covenant, and we see if we can hear that. Okay, so who wrote it and when was it written? Well, I think I did say it was written after Cyrus had come, and they were headed for back home, so to speak. But let's look at this. I'll read most of the lesson. This comes from Isaiah 61:8. And remember, this is second Isaiah. See if you can hear a voice from God, if not congratulating us as the covenanters, at least looking for something better. Maybe we're not going to be a nation under a king, but we're going to be the light of the world. That the light is at the end of the tunnel. We can see it. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. I will faithfully give them their recompense, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants, this is us we're talking about, our descendants. Their descendants shall be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. That sounds to me like persecution, that we've been the downtrodden one forever and ever, and now things are getting better. All who see them shall acknowledge that they are the people whom the Lord has blessed. So the fact that they hope that we hold, I'm talking about we being the Hebrews, the fact that we do hold up to a standard higher than our neighbors and we're different, that's not going to be held against us. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My whole being shall exult in my God. Now this, I guess, is the prophet talking about his own feeling about this new prospects, the hope. For he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decks himself with garland, as the bride adorns herself with jewels. That's looking forward. A wedding is a happy thing, looking to the future. And we've got a little bit of springtime to fit in with the next phrase. For as the earth brings forth its shoots, and as a garden causes what is sown in it to spring up, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before all the nations. On a personal note, I planted my seed crops about a week ago, and I've yet to see germination. Maybe the enthusiasm from Isaiah will help him do something tonight after all this rain. And then from chapter 62, verse 2, read, again, think about the trials and tribulations, nation to nation, when they were a nation. They got the short end of the stick and endured. Now God is speaking through the prophet about other nations and their relationships to us in the future down the road. The nations shall see your vindication, and all the kings your glory, and you shall be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will give. You shall be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. You shall no more be turned forsaken, and your land shall no more be turned desolate. Could you hear the voice of hope here as opposed to doom in earlier prophets, including the first Isaiah? Does this fit at all into our guidepost having to do with how in the world this covenant, this thing of cohesion has survived? Well, we're not going to answer how in the world. In fact, it has. It's just a marvelous thing to think about. One of the questions I've had about this is, we have the Jews on the one hand of the covenant and God on the other. And that just unthinkingly, I count the Jews as a unit, a homogeneous unit. And if you think about it, it is not. Not at all. And our lesson writers have pointed that out. What happens when the Jews go back, those that go back to Jerusalem, of course, they're homeless. They can't just go in and reacquire their land. But one of the first things they do is begin rebuilding the temple. That's in accordance with the sustaining the covenant. Ezra and Nehemiah are there, and it's interesting, the image of rain that is not good for gardeners and agricultural people, which they were agricultural people. Rain is always thought to be good. But you know, they gathered in a group and it happened to be raining and everybody had to stand outside. It's the only time I know in the Bible where a gentle rain or a non-threatening rain would seem to be a nuisance. Well, here they are. And what is the message to the people who just back from Babylonia? The message of Ezra and Nehemiah is of one of purity. That is, here they're standing together as a group and they say, okay, part of your covenantal relation is that we remain pure. In other words, get rid of your foreign wives. And again, I thought, good night. Well, there it is in black and white. And so the question about a single approach to messages, does it exist? Ezra and Nehemiah, they were contemporaries of Isaiah, I suppose, or close. How could they hear God so differently? Well, they do. Listen to this. I'll read from the passage that's listed here in our lesson book. It's Isaiah 56, chapters 6 through 7. Keep in mind this business of purity for Ezra and Nehemiah versus that of Isaiah number 2. And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants. I'll say that again. The foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, like joining the church, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants. Everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it, and holds fast to my covenant, there it is, holds fast to my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called the house of prayer of all peoples. That's a different view on what it means to be a covenant person. And I'm sure some of these, well, I don't need to elaborate on that. Well, those are the things I wanted to say relative to this. It was a help to me as I went through this to see the covenantal relationship is what survived. It's the entity. It is, we're all in this together, even though we have differing opinions as to what this God is actually telling us. We've got, well, let's see, in the modern times, might as well list the various divisions of Judaism. You know, we Protestants, particularly Presbyterians, have these divisions. We've got the evangelicals, we've got the conservatives, we got the liberals, and we're all in the same boat. We may disagree on a lot of things, but basically we're Presbyterians or Methodists or whatever. Well, what about modern Judaism? I looked that up, and the names are almost congruent or right along next to the names we have in Protestantism. We have progressive, liberal, conservative, reconstructionist, conservative rabbis, reform rabbis, reconstructing. That's too long for me, that word to even pronounce, rabbis. So they're together, but they're not homogeneous in terms of their response to exactly how these things have been transferred from one generation to the next. Okay, I'll end with a personal note having to do with the covenant and with Jewish people. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. There weren't that many Jews, but I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't exist were it not for one of the leaders in Greensboro back in the early part of the 20th century, one Caesar Cone. He probably was the largest employer in the little town of Greensboro back in the 20s and 30s, and so made lots of trips to New York City. Well, while he was in New York City, he met a young foreigner, a Swede, by the name of Carl Carlson, who had told his dad he was going to go to the New World, to go to New York, to be with his cousin Godfrey. That it sounded like it was a great time over there. Please give me my inheritance. Well, that he could fit it all into one pocket. So when he got off on Ellis Island, this Carl Carlson, he didn't have much money to put together, but he had a trade, or rather he had a profession, a Swedish massage, we call it today. He had a particularly good touch that just enthralled, I called him Old Man Cone, Caesar Cone. So after several sessions and getting to know Carl, Mr. Cone made the following proposal. He says, I will pay for a whole year of your pay. I'll guarantee you a clientele if you'll come to Greensboro for 1 year. Well, he's a venturesome person, this Carl Carlson. Said, I'll take him up on that, and I'll just come back to the bright lights. He really enjoyed what he found there in New York City. Well, he met a bright-eyed, effervescent young lady by the name of Lorinda, went in Greensboro, and they fell in love and married. And their firstborn was born in 1911, turned out to be my mother. Well, how does that fit in with the covenant, other than the fact that Caesar's a Jew? Well, one of his granddaughters, Jeanette Cone, was a friend of mine. She lived in a big house close enough to walk to the Greensboro Country Club, and we weren't that far away from it either. So during the hot summer months, the only place to go swimming was in the Greensboro Country Club swimming pool. Well, guess who could not be a member of the Greensboro Country Club in 1949, 48? Jeanette Cone. It did not cross my mind to wonder how she felt about that. She, and on the other hand, those Cone Lake and Cone Park outside of Greensboro, invited all her friends, that included me. And I was out there swimming in the lake and having a grand old time. So that hit me. Discrimination. We tend to think about that discrimination against the African Americans. Again, there I was, at that part of my life, I thought, shoot, that's just the way things are. I didn't get into their skin and wonder how it felt to be marginalized. But that now, of course, I can see just clearly that here I was, a privileged person, and right in front of my nose, and I didn't see what was going on. Okay. As I say, I'm done. I hope things go well this week for everybody. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.